The fire spat embers into the twilight, the only sound in the tense quiet between the three of them. Alara didn't flinch. The tears had been burned out of her long ago, replaced by a hollow ache of shame. She stood, a thin silhouette in a threadbare dress, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames, refusing to look at her father or the Apache chief who were deciding her fate. Her father's words were clipped, businesslike, selling her off like livestock. She's hardy, barely eats, never complains. Chief Kona, broad-shouldered and carved from the very stone of the mountains, simply inclined his head. A pile of furs and iron goods sealed the deal. She wasn't stolen. She was discarded. A broken thing. The rejection was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She expected to be dragged away, but Kona merely held out a heavy wool blanket. His gesture, impossibly, held a whisper of gentleness. As he turned and mounted his horse, a wild, terrifying thought sparked in the desolate landscape of her heart. What if this ending was actually a beginning? What if true freedom lay not in being wanted, but in being utterly, irrevocably lost? Part 1. The Silent Path. The journey into the heart of Apache territory was a silent one. Kona rode ahead, a formidable figure against the vast, unforgiving landscape. He never looked back, yet Alara felt his awareness of her as a constant, tangible presence. She followed on foot, the blanket he'd given her a strange weight on her shoulders, her mind a maelstrom of bitter memories. The jeers of children, the pitying glances of the townswomen, her stepmother's cruel taunts about her crooked face. Each step took her further from that world, from the cage of their judgment. The desert air was sharp and clean, stripping away the cloying scent of pity and scorn she had lived with her whole life. A strange feeling began to uncoil in her chest. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was something fiercer, more primal. The stark, electrifying awareness of survival. She was alone, utterly and completely, and for the first time, it felt less like a curse and more like a challenge. When the sun bled across the horizon, painting the mesas in hues of blood and gold, Kona finally stopped. He dismounted by a small, gurgling creek and turned to face her. His gaze was unnerving. It wasn't vacant or dismissive. It was intense, analytical, as if he were reading the story of her life in the lines of her face. She clutched the blanket tighter, a pathetic shield. "Why?" she whispered, the sound swallowed by the immense silence. "Why me?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he knelt and began to build a fire. His hands moved with an economy and grace that was mesmerizing. He wasn't asserting dominance. He was creating a circle of warmth in the encroaching cold, an unspoken invitation. As the flames grew, he reached into a leather pouch and pulled out a piece of dried meat and a small, hard biscuit, placing them on a flat rock near her. It was a simple offering, yet it was more than she had ever been given freely. At home, food was earned, a reward for staying quiet and invisible. Here, it was simply given. She ate slowly, the rough texture of the food a grounding reality. She watched him across the fire, his profile stoic, his eyes reflecting the flames. Who was this man who would trade valuable goods for a worthless girl? She saw no cruelty in him, no leering intent. There was only a profound stillness, a strength that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. That night, she lay wrapped in the blanket, the fire a warm, beating heart between them. She expected to be terrified, to lie awake listening for any sign of danger. Instead, she felt a strange and unsettling peace. The stars overhead were a brilliant, scattered canopy, more vibrant than she had ever seen them from the confines of her small, grimy window back home. She listened to the sound of Kona's steady breathing, a rhythmic counterpoint to the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind. A wild, desperate yearning bloomed within her, a yearning to know the man behind the silence, to understand the world he inhabited. For the first time, she didn't dream of escape. She dreamed of the horizon, of the endless, untamed land that stretched out before them. And for a fleeting moment she felt not like a captive, but like an explorer on the verge of a great and terrible discovery. This man, this land, They were a mystery, and a part of her, a part she thought had died long ago, burned to no more. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was intertwined with a dangerous, thrilling curiosity. She was his property, traded and paid for. Yet as she watched him sleep, a silhouette of immense power and solitude, she felt a shocking, possessive thought. He is mine, too. Mine to understand. Mine to unravel. Part 2. The Language of Touch. Alara awoke not to a command, but to the smell of something savory. Kona was kneeling by the creek, his back to her, washing a small bird he must have caught. The rising sun caught the obsidian sheen of his long hair, tied back with a simple leather thong. When he was done, he prepared it with practiced ease and cooked it over the fire's embers. He said nothing, but when it was ready, he handed her half. The gesture was so matter-of-fact, so devoid of any expectation of gratitude, that it brought a lump to her throat. At home, kindness was a transaction. Here, it was like the air, freely given, essential for life. As they traveled deeper, the landscape grew more rugged, more beautiful. The silence between them began to change. It was no longer a void, but a space filled with unspoken communication. He would point with his chin towards a plant, and she would learn to recognize it as medicinal. He would make a low sound in his throat, and she would see the hawk circling high above. He was teaching her, not with words, but with shared experience. He was showing her how to see the world through his eyes, a world that was alive, breathing, and full of meaning. One afternoon, they had to cross a fast-moving stream. The rocks were slick with moss, and Alara, clumsy from a lifetime of downcast eyes, slipped. She cried out, expecting to hit the icy water. Instead, a powerful arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against a wall of solid muscle. Kona held her steady, his hand firm on her hip, his body a warm, unyielding shield against the current. Time seemed to stop. She could feel the heat of him through her thin dress, smell the scent of pine smoke and leather that clung to him. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. He held her for a moment longer than necessary, his dark eyes searching hers. In their depths, she saw not just patience, but something else. A flicker of heat, a raw intensity that made her breath catch. He released her just as quickly, his expression once again unreadable. But the touch lingered, a brand on her skin. That night, the space between them by the fire felt different. It was charged, humming with an energy that was both terrifying and intoxicating. She found herself watching his hands as he mended a strap on his saddle. They were strong, capable hands, yet they had held her with such care. A wild, unbidden fantasy flashed through her mind, of those hands in her hair, on her skin, pulling her close. She shivered, hugging her knees to her chest, shocked and ashamed by the ferocity of her own desire. This was madness. He was her master, a savage, as her people would call him, and she was a plain, unwanted girl. Yet the feelings he stirred in her were anything but plain. They were vibrant, powerful, and utterly terrifying. He looked up then, as if he could feel the turmoil of her thoughts. He didn't speak, but he held her gaze, and the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. The firelight carved shadows and highlights onto his strong features, making him look like an ancient god of this wild land. A wave of heat washed over her, a dizzying combination of fear and a desperate, aching longing. She wanted to break the silence, to ask him what he saw when he looked at her, to demand to know what she was to him. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she simply stared back, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. In his eyes, she saw not the reflection of an ugly, broken girl, but the reflection of a woman. And in that moment, under the vast, uncaring desert sky, Alara felt beautiful for the first time in her life. It was a dangerous, intoxicating feeling, and she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that she would follow this man anywhere. Part 3. The First Crack. Their journey brought them to the edge of a small Apache encampment. It was the first time Alara had seen Kona's people, and fear, cold and familiar, coiled in her gut. The women stared, their dark eyes missing nothing, their whispers like the rustle of dry leaves. An older man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and hard-won authority, approached Kona. His words were sharp, guttural, and though Alara understood none of them, his dismissive gesture towards her was a universal language. He spat on the ground near her feet. Alara flinched, her body automatically curling inward, a response conditioned by years of scorn. She expected Kona to remain stoic, to ignore the insult as he ignored everything else. Instead, something in him shifted. The air around him grew heavy, charged with a sudden lethal energy. He took a step forward, placing himself between Alara and the elder. He spoke, his voice low but carrying a weight that silenced the entire camp. The words were Apache, but the meaning was unmistakable. It was a declaration, a claiming. The elder, for all his authority, took a half step back, his eyes widening slightly. Kona had not defended property. He had defended her. That night, the tension was a third presence at their fire. Alara couldn't stop replaying the scene in her mind. He had stood for her. No one had ever stood for her. Why? She finally whispered, her voice raw. They look at me and see nothing. An unwanted burden. Why do you defend a burden? Kona was silent for a long time, feeding sticks into the flames. The firelight danced across his face, making it impossible to read his expression. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion she couldn't name. My sister, he said, the English words sounding strange and heavy on his tongue. She had eyes like yours. Sad. The world told her she was nothing. She began to believe it. He paused, his jaw tight. A spirit can break, even when the body is strong. No one stood for her. I will not make that mistake again. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. He wasn't just a chief, a warrior. He was a man who had known loss, who understood the quiet devastation of a broken spirit. He saw his sister's sadness in her eyes. He saw her pain. In that moment, Alara didn't feel like a burden. She felt seen. Truly and completely seen, perhaps for the first time. An overwhelming wave of emotion crashed over her. Gratitude, sorrow for his sister, and something else, something fierce and protective. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to offer some comfort in return. Instead, she simply held his gaze. I am not broken, she said, her voice shaking but firm. It was a promise, both to him and to herself. Later, as she lay on her sleeping mat, he came to her side. He knelt, and in his hand was a small, intricately carved wooden comb. My mother, he said, his voice a low rumble, made for my wife, but my wife died before she could be my wife. He pressed the comb into her hand. Its surface was worn smooth with time, fitting perfectly in her palm. It was a gift of immense significance, a piece of his history, of his heart. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and unstoppable. But these were not the tears of shame or rejection. They were tears of a profound, shattering release. She wasn't his wife, not a slave, not a burden. She was something else entirely. Something worth a story. Something worth defending. Something worth the comb of a woman he had loved. A wild, possessive love for this silent, wounded man bloomed in her chest, so fierce it hurt to breathe. He had not just saved her body, he was saving her soul. Part 4. The Unspoken Vow. The comb became a sacred object. Every night, Alara would sit by the fire and run it through her hair. The simple, repetitive motion, a form of prayer. The act was transformative. She was no longer just the ugly girl. She was a woman being courted, not with flowery words or trinkets, but with acts of profound respect and shared vulnerability. Her hair, once a tangled mess she hid in shame, began to shine in the firelight. A strange and powerful confidence began to take root in her. Their intimacy grew not in words, but in shared rhythms. She learned to anticipate his needs, handing him the tool he required before he asked, finding the driest wood for the fire. He, in turn, began to share more of his world with her. He taught her the names of the constellations, tracing their stories in the vast night sky with his finger. He showed her how to read the tracks of animals in the dust, to understand the subtle language of the wilderness. He was giving her the keys to his kingdom, a kingdom not of power and possessions, but of knowledge and belonging. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the cliffs in fiery colors, a laugh bubbled up out of her. It was a genuine, uninhibited sound, born of a sudden, overwhelming sense of peace. The sound startled them both. Kona turned to look at her, a rare, slow smile spreading across his face. The smile transformed him, erasing the harsh lines and revealing a warmth that stole her breath. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated desire through her. The air crackled. The world fell away, leaving only the two of them, suspended in the golden light. He leaned in, his eyes dark with an emotion that mirrored the wild beating of her own heart. This was it, the precipice she had been teetering on for weeks. He was going to kiss her. The thought was both terrifying and ecstatically welcome. She closed her eyes, her lips parting in anticipation. But the kiss never came. Instead, his lips brushed her forehead, a touch as soft as a whisper. Yet it sealed a vow more profound than any words could express. It was a promise of protection, of respect, of a shared future. When he pulled back, the intensity in his eyes had softened into a deep, unwavering tenderness. He didn't need to say he loved her. She felt it in his every action, in his every glance. And he knew with that same silent certainty that she loved him in return. It was a wild, untamed love, born in the heart of the wilderness, as strong and enduring as the ancient stones around them. The next day, they encountered a group of young Apache warriors. Their leader, a brash youth named Kale, eyed Alara with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. "The chief takes a white woman for a pet," he sneered in broken English, his eyes flicking over her plain dress. Alara tensed, expecting the familiar sting of shame. But before she could react, Kona stepped in front of her, his body a solid shield. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply looked at Kale, a look of such cold, lethal authority that the young warrior visibly paled and backed away, muttering an apology. Kona turned back to Alara, his hand finding hers, his fingers lacing through hers. It was a simple, public gesture, but it was a declaration to the entire world. She is mine. She is not a pet. She is my equal. As they walked away, hand in hand, Alara knew she was no longer just a follower. She was his partner, his woman, and she would fight anyone who dared to suggest otherwise. Part 5. The Civilized Monster. Their fragile peace was shattered by the discovery of a wrecked settler's wagon. A lone survivor, a blonde woman named Ruth, clung to a rifle, her blue eyes wide with terror and hatred. "Savage!" she shrieked at the sight of Kona, her voice cracking. Alara's heart sank. This was the world she had left behind, a world that saw only monsters in the shadows. "He won't hurt you," Alara said, stepping forward, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. Ruth's gaze snapped to her, filled with disbelief and betrayal. "You're with him?" she spat, the words dripping with venom. Despite the woman's hostility, they helped her. Kona, with a gentleness that was achingly familiar to Alara, tended to Ruth's injuries, while Alara calmed the terrified horse and salvaged what supplies she could. Ruth accepted their help, but her suspicion never wavered, her eyes constantly darting to Kona, as if expecting him to attack at any moment. The presence of Ruth was a poison, seeping into the sanctuary Alara and Kona had built. It resurrected all of Alara's old insecurities, the fear of being judged, of being seen as monstrous by association. Ruth spoke of an army outpost, a place of safety and order, and insisted they take her there. Alara felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. That world of fences and rules was no longer a symbol of safety to her. It was a cage. The outpost was a scar on the prairie, a place of harsh lines and colder eyes. The soldiers rushed to help Ruth, their concern turning to instant hostility the moment they saw Kona. "Step back, Apache," one of them barked, his hand on his gun. "We'll handle this." They grabbed Alara, pulling her away from Kona. "Don't you worry, miss. You're safe now." "Stop," Alara cried, struggling against their grip. "He's with me. He saved us." But her words were meaningless to them. They saw only what they wanted to see, a savage and his captive. They threw Kona to the ground, binding his wrists with a brutal efficiency that made Alara's blood run cold. Through it all, Kona remained silent, his gaze locked on Alara. In his eyes, she saw no fear, no anger, only that same unshakable strength that had been her anchor. And in that look, a silent message passed between them. Be strong. Do not let them break you. A fire ignited in Alara's soul. The timid, broken girl was gone, burned away by the desert sun and the heat of a love she would die for. She stormed into the captain's tent, a man with whiskey on his breath and casual cruelty in his eyes. "That man is a hero," she snarled, her voice shaking with rage. "You will release him." The captain simply laughed, a dismissive, ugly sound. "We don't take orders from Indian lovers here, Missy. He's an Apache. That's all the reason I need." Desperate, Alara found Ruth. "Tell them," she begged. "Tell them what he did." But Ruth, now clean and safe within the walls of her own world, refused to meet her eyes. "It's for the best," she mumbled. "This is where you belong." The betrayal was absolute. Alara looked at this woman, a woman who would let her savior rot in a cage out of fear and prejudice, and felt nothing but contempt. This was civilization. This was the monster. And Alara knew, with a terrifying clarity, that she would burn it all to the ground to get her man back. That night, under the cold, watchful eyes of the sentries, she made her own vow. He had stood for her. Now, she would set him free, or die trying. Her love for him was no longer a quiet, gentle thing. It was a raging inferno, and it would consume anyone who stood in its way. Part 6. The Fire of Freedom. Alara became a creature of shadow and desperation. Every lesson the wilderness had taught her, she now put to use. She watched the guards, learned their routines, noted the layout of the camp. Fear was a constant companion, but her love for Kona, a wild, ferocious thing, was stronger. It was a fire in her veins, burning away all doubt. She found the quartermaster's shed, a place of forgotten tools and lazy inventory. A pair of bolt cutters, heavy and cold, felt like a scepter in her hands. This was power, the power to break chains. Slipping into the holding tent was terrifyingly easy. Kona was kneeling, a silhouette of defiance even in captivity. He watched her approach, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. He didn't speak as she cut through his bonds, the snap of the metal the sweetest sound she had ever heard. "They will hunt us," he whispered, his voice a low rumble as he chafed his wrists. "They will not stop." "Then let them come," she whispered back, her voice filled with a feral intensity that surprised even herself. She pressed her lips to his, a desperate, hungry kiss. It was not gentle. It was a fusion of fear, rage, and a love so powerful it felt like it could shatter bone. It was a promise of war. He responded in kind, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against him until she couldn't breathe, his mouth claiming hers with a possessive force that left her dizzy. They fled into the night, two ghosts melting into the landscape. They ran for days, fueled by adrenaline and a shared, desperate will to survive. The pursuit was relentless. They could hear the baying of the hounds, see the distant flicker of the soldiers' torches. But Kona knew this land as he knew his own heart. He led them through treacherous canyons and hidden game trails, always one step ahead. During this desperate flight, their bond was forged in the crucible of shared danger. They were no longer just a man and a woman. They were a single entity, their movements synchronized, their thoughts attuned. They communicated with glances, with touches, their love a silent, roaring fire that kept the fear at bay. Finally, they reached the sanctuary, a hidden canyon, home to Kona's aunt, a wise woman with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of generations. The chase ended there. Captain Marsh and his men cornered them in the canyon, their rifles raised, their faces grim with righteous fury. "It's over," Marsh snarled. "Give up the girl." This time, Ilara did not hesitate. She stepped in front of Kona, her body a shield, her chin held high. "I am not a girl to be given," she said, her voice ringing with a power she never knew she possessed. "And he is not your prisoner. He is my husband, my chief, my life." The words were a vow, spoken not under a roof, but under the vast open sky, witnessed by the ancient stones. She turned to Kona, her eyes blazing with a wild, untamable love. "I choose this man. I choose this life. If you want him, you will have to kill me first." A silence fell, heavy and profound. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably, their certainty shaken by the raw conviction in her voice. Even Ruth, who had followed them, looked down in shame. Kona placed his hand on Ilara's shoulder, a silent statement of unity. They stood together, two people against the world, their love a fortress. Marsh, sputtering with impotent rage, saw that he had not found a captive, but a queen standing beside her king, defeated not by force of arms, but by a power he could not comprehend. He gave the order to retreat. As the soldiers disappeared, Ilara sagged against Kona, the adrenaline finally leaving her. He held her, his strong arms a haven. "My warrior," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with an emotion that mirrored her own. She was no longer Ilara the ugly, Ilara the burden. She was Ilara, who had faced down the world and won. She was his, he was hers. And their story, a testament to a Wild West tale of untamed love, would be whispered on the wind for generations. In the hidden canyon, their love bloomed, wild and free. They were more than man and wife. They were two halves of a single soul, forged in fire and rebellion. Their life was not one of ease, but it was one of profound truth. They taught their children the stories of the stars, the language of the earth, and the most important lesson of all, that true value is not found in the eyes of others, but is claimed by the strength of one's own heart. Their story teaches us that love, in its purest form, is not about finding a perfect person, but about seeing an imperfect person perfectly. It is a wild, untamable force that can give us the courage to fight for who we are and who we choose to stand beside. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in civilization, but in the untamed wilderness of the human heart. Thank you for joining us at Wild West Stories. If this tale of fierce love and rebellion moved you, please show your support. Like this video, share it with someone who loves a good story, and be sure to subscribe for more true-hearted tales from the frontier.